Well, call it a drive shaft or a prop shaft or a Cardan shaft. This assembly transmits power from the transmission at the front of the car all the way back through these three shafts to the final drive on the back axle. So let's step through these parts and how they go together. This is the front shaft. It connects to the transmission via this rubber joint. It's the same on the back end too, same part number. But on this front joint, there is a heat shield that goes over it. Fits on just like that. And then the rubber joint connects to the transmission. The bolts that are used are all the same. So those can go in either connecting to the shaft or connecting to the transmission. And the same is true at this end. Same bolts, 3 of them connect this joint to the shaft, and 3 connect to the viscous clutch on the differential. So then those 2 shafts each have a CV joint on the end, which you can see I've already assembled. Those CV joints connect with a flange at each end of the center shaft, and then there's a hanger bearing at either end of the center shaft. This rear one, as you can see, it's symmetrical. The front one is offset, so you can't get those mixed up too badly. To get started, I'll assemble the joints on the ends of these shafts. So let's start with this front prop shaft. As you can see, I've already installed a constant velocity joint. This goes on just like any CV joint on a regular drive axle, so there's nothing much to show there. This end's a little more interesting. It gets one of these rubber joints. You'll notice of the 6 holes, 3 of them stick out. Like the little cylindrical inserts are poking out a few millimeters on 3 of them, but they're flush on the other 3. And likewise, it's the same on the other side. They're opposite though. So the flush one on this side sticks out on that side. So when you install this heat shield, make sure that the 3 holes go over the protruding cylinders on one of the sides. And then those will mate directly against the mounting points on this prop shaft, like so. And then the fasteners we're using are a 10 millimeter 12-point head with a 40 millimeter shaft, 1.5 millimeter pitch. These are all the same. It doesn't matter which ones you put where. I'm going to use a little bit of red thread locker on these. Now, I don't have the torque specs for the Gulf Country on these fasteners, but I did look up the Vanagon torque specs, and they were 55 Newton meters or 40 foot-pounds. So that's what I'm going to use. All right, there's 40 foot-pounds. Putting on a 10 millimeter 12-point socket. Let's try that. All right. Nice. All right. I'm starting to think I shouldn't have installed the exhaust before I put in the drive shaft. And here's one reason. It's kind of tricky to get this prop shaft up in there. I found I have to kind of sneak it in from back here and then swing it around in order to get it up above the catalytic converter. So you can probably see that the joint is a little snug in here, partly because that catalytic converter is in the way. If that catalytic converter weren't there, this would drop right in. I also had to disconnect the shift rod and push that selector out of the way to make room. And even then, this is still pretty tight. I actually removed all 4 bolts from the steering rack so that it would move just slightly. And that gives me just enough room to get this in. And the trick is to rotate this around until I get to one of them low spots in the rubber. And then that drops down. There we go. Now we're gonna put some thread locker on these bolts. There we go. Okay. Let's shift you. Let's see if we can get 2 holes visible. One on top and one down below. All right, those are snug. We'll come back and torque these later. All right, so with the steering rack reattached, I can hook the linkage, the shift linkage back up. All right, so you can see the shaft is attached. Got to torque it down yet. I'm gonna wait on that till I get all these connected, and then we'll go back through and torque everything. Now I think the rest of this should go a little easier. The exhaust isn't so much in the way. So the next segment we're gonna do is this rear section that connects to the viscous clutch and then connects to the hanger bearing. Here's the rear prop shaft. And as before, you can see I previously installed the CV joint on it, just like any other axle CV joint. And then on this end, we've got the rubber joint. It's just like the one on the front, except this one doesn't have a heat shield. We're gonna go ahead and attach it using the same type of bolts. And I'm gonna add a little bit of a thread locker. And same sort of deal. The bolt should be going in through a flush hole. The one that protrudes will mate up to the prop shaft. And use very point. We're still at 40. It's bending my bar. It failed. Well, let's try another idea. Okay, let's see if this works. $40. $40. Oh, moved a little. Yeah, she's moving. Okay, now the weight is hitting the jaw. Let's see if we get lucky. I should point out There's a little bit of an O-ring. I'm just gonna give it a little shot of silicone lube. We're gonna get one of my bolts ready. Now, this just slides right on to the viscous clutch. Put that up at the top. And as before, I'm just gonna snug these down. I'll torque them up later. So now we got two CV shafts waiting to receive that center prop shaft. So let's go get that. And finally, here's the center shaft. As you can see, I pressed the two intermediate bearings on. It's time to put these flanges on, and they don't need to be pressed on. You can basically pound them on. The bolts that fasten the flanges onto the shaft, these are M10 by 20 millimeters with a 1.5 millimeter pitch. The washer is fairly special. It's a thick washer. It's 30 millimeters in diameter on the outside, 10.5 millimeters diameter on the inside, and 3 millimeters thick. It's pretty sturdy. Thread locker on now. Now, I looked on the internet and I did not find a torque spec for this M10 bolt. So what I'm going to do is just zap it in with the lowest setting on my impact. And that should do it. This is ready to go back in the car. So as you can see, I got my ratchet straps up here again. This will just give me like a third hand, basically. Okay, it's time to take the Ziploc bag off. Let's see if these little CV bolts will thread. Looks like this front ratchet strap's not doing any good. So as before, I'm just gonna leave these loose for now. I'll come back and torque them later. I wanna make sure I can get the rear CV hooked up. The next step is to fasten the intermediate bearings to the frame using these M8 bolts that are 1.25 pitch. So according to the internet, we're supposed to torque these to about 20 foot-pounds. let's see if we can do this. It's a little tricky, torquing with an extension. Okay. All right. Good. These CV bolts use a 12.8 millimeter socket, and according to the internet, the torque specs, there's some debate. Some people say the factory setting is too low. At least on that Vanagon page, the general consensus was that 32 foot-pounds is the safer option. So let's go with that. Let's get these guys. All right, let's review. Here's the front shaft connected to the transaxle with a rubber joint and a heat shield. A CV joint connecting to the center shaft. Another CV joint connecting to the rear shaft. And it connects to the viscous clutch with another rubber joint. I think that's looking pretty darn good.